These are some of the worst school shootings in American history, starting with the Virginia Tech school shooting, a massacre that took the lives of 32 innocent people. April 16th, 2007, a lone gunman at Virginia Tech committed one of the worst acts of violence against the United States, a tragedy that nobody saw coming. Okay, wait, just before we get into that, like I said in part 1, this type of video is a very sensitive topic. And I want to personally say that I tried my absolute best to share these horrific stories without disrespecting anyone's memory. Now, let's start with the shooter, Seung-Hui Cho. Now, Cho wasn't just some random guy who snapped one day. He had a long history of mental health issues and was known for his disturbing behavior, like stalking girls at his school. Born in South Korea, Cho immigrated to the United States with his family at the age of 8. And by the time he was in middle school, the disturbing signs were already there. He was diagnosed with selective mutism, which is a type of an anxiety disorder, and was also diagnosed with severe depression. But like a lot of these cases, the full scope of his condition wasn't fully seen until much later. Like we already said, he stalked 2 female students and was then declared mentally ill by a Virginia special justice in 2005. But despite all of this, Cho was still able to purchase firearms legally. First off, Cho left behind a manifesto, letters, and some seriously disturbing videos. Just to really put you in the mind of Cho, this guy recorded his rants, took a bunch of creepy photos, and mailed them to NBC News while he was in the middle of his killing spree. Yeah, you heard me correctly, during the attack. In these videos, he's basically pouring his anger out and blaming everyone else for his misery, making it very clear this wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment thing that he did. He knew exactly what he was going to do and had no problem telling the world why.
I did it for them. I did it to make you stop what you did to me, to the future generations of the weak and the defenseless.
Now, Cho bought his weapons months before the shooting. He picked up a .22 caliber Walther P22 in February 2007 and a 9mm Glock 19 in March 2007. This guy was gearing up for months. Let's fast forward to April 16th, 2007. The day that changed the lives of hundreds of innocent people. It started like any other day. It's a Monday, the beginning of a regular school week at Virginia Tech. Students are either asleep or getting ready for their morning classes. But at around 7:15 a.m., Cho walks into West Ambler Johnston Hall, a co-ed dorm on campus. His first 2 victims were 19-year-old freshman Emily Hilscher and 22-year-old senior resident assistant Ryan Clark. Emily was shot first. Ryan, hearing the commotion, rushed over to help her. Both were shot to death in cold blood. Now, it wasn't widely publicized where he shot them, but both are said to have died almost instantly. So most likely they were probably shot in the head. After brutally killing the 2 people, Cho slips out of the dorm unnoticed, ready to start phase 2 of his dark plan. Now, here's where things get even worse. The university didn't immediately know this was the start of a larger attack. The initial assumption was that this was an isolated incident and maybe a domestic dispute. So instead of locking down the entire campus, they issued a little email warning at 9:26 a.m. saying that there had been a shooting, but the authorities believed the situation was under control. After killing Emily and Ryan, Cho doesn't immediately launch into the next attack. Instead, he goes back to his dorm room, changes out of his bloody clothes, and prepares a package to send to NBC News. This package, mailed during the time between the first and second attacks, included a video of Cho rambling about his issues with the society.
You had 100 billion chances and ways to have avoided today, but you decided to spill my blood. You forced me into a corner and gave me only one option. The decision was yours. Now you have blood on your hands that will never wash off.
Yeah, the guy was disturbed to say the least. While all of this is happening, students and staff are going about their day completely unaware that a second, much deadlier phase of Cho's plan is right around the corner. At approximately 9:40 a.m., 2 hours after the first shooting, Cho heads to Norris Hall. And here's where things get seriously dark. Cho chains the doors of the building shut from the inside, ensuring that nobody can escape. And this is where he begins the killing of more innocent people. With 2 handguns, Cho moves from room to room, shooting everyone in sight. Now let's actually get into each room, starting with room 206, the Advanced Hydrology Engineering class. This is where the chaos begins at Norris Hall. Cho bursts in the room, shooting at random. 13 students were inside this room. Cho shot and killed the professor, G.V. Loganathan, then just continuing firing, killing 9 of the 13 students in the room and injuring 2 others. After he left the classroom, Cho fired down the hall at 2 students, who were running for their lives from room 204, which was right next door. The students somehow managed to escape down the stairwell across the hall. But then the shooter turned and fired at another student and a substitute professor from room 205, who were looking out from the door. Thankfully, they did, in fact, survive. Next, he moved into room 207, where instructor Christopher James Bishop was teaching Intro German. Cho shot at Bishop and some of the students near the door, then walked down the aisle shooting even more victims. Some students tried to block the door or hide, but Cho was relentless. And unfortunately, Bishop and 4 students were killed right there, with 6 other students being shot and wounded. Before we get into the next room, I just want to say that one of the professors, Kevin Granada, heard the gunshots from a different floor and took 20 students from a classroom on the 3rd floor into his office, where he then locked the door and rushed down the stairs to see who else he could save. He was accompanied by another professor, Wally Grant. When they entered the hallway, Professor Wally and Kevin were both shot by Cho. After being shot, Grant quickly ran into the bathroom trying to save his own life. He was wounded, but did actually survive the injuries later on. But unfortunately, Kevin Granada did in fact die from his wounds. But because of Kevin, none of the students locked in his office were ever hurt or killed. This man was a true hero. And Cho was not finished here. Just a few minutes before the second shooting began, Jocelyn Cotier Nowak was teaching intermediate French. One of the students in her class arrived late and she looked over at Jocelyn and told her that she was late because the police had locked down her dorm. This dorm was West Ambler Johnston, and the reason that it was locked down was because of a double homicide that occurred earlier that morning. 9:39 a.m. The gunshots were getting louder. Now here's the part that gets scary. Everyone in the room thought that the sound had to do with nearby construction, so nobody in the room even panicked. But then, in a second, Jocelyn's face dropped to the floor as she realized what was really happening in the hallway. She turns to her class and says, "Please tell me that's not what I think it is." She then walked over to the door, opened it, and peeked into the hallway, which is when she slammed it and barricaded the door as quickly as she could with a few desks. In a complete panic, she turned to her students and started yelling at them to get on the floor and under their desks. Some did, but others froze because of the fear. Cho started heading towards room 211. In this room, a 911 call was made by Colin Goddard, who, by the way, is one of the survivors of the Virginia Tech shooting. "Room 211, Norris Hall," he says quietly.
"Where is that?"
The dispatcher asks. "Virginia Tech." His tone was urgent but somewhat calm. Some noises are heard over the phone. "The door, put desks in front of the door," is heard in the background. Cho shoots through the door, and not even a minute into the call, loud bangs are echoing through the line. He then risks a glance back and catches a glimpse of someone, combat boots and all. He mutters something, but it's too quiet to hear, and then nothing. He goes silent as Cho enters and kills Professor Couture Nowak right in front of him. The dispatcher asks if Goddard's okay. Nothing. Meanwhile, the gunfire continues. Goddard shuts his eyes, probably hoping this nightmare will end, but it doesn't, as everyone in the room hid in fear. A student named Matthew Laporte, who was a trained Air Force ROTC member of the Virginia Tech Corps of Cadets, knew he had to do something. So he looked right at the shooter, got up, and charged towards Cho with everything he had and attempted to tackle him to the ground to stop him. Matthew was shot 7 times during his one last attempt to save his classmates. Goddard, in full survival mode, tries to hide the phone under his desk. The dispatcher's now telling the units on the way.
"Yeah, it sounds like the shooter's in the room and the caller's not talking."
Then Cho starts firing towards the students by the windows. Female screams rip through the room with another series of shots. Goddard feels the impact. A bullet tears right through his legs, shattering his femur. Just when you think it can't get any worse, it does. He screams. The phone flies from his hand and is picked up by Emily Haas. "We've been hurt," Haas whispers. "He's reloading," she then whispers again. Haas doesn't say anything else on the line so that she isn't found by Cho. And guys, in that room, 11 out of the 18 students were killed and another 6 were injured, which only accounts for 17 out of the 18 students. So the sole uninjured survivor was Clay Violand, who laid on the ground in the pool of another student's blood pretending to be dead. Just for a second, imagine how scary that actually is for a second. Let's fast forward to where Cho entered room 204. Professor Liviu Librescu, who is actually a Holocaust survivor, saw the monster heading for the door. He looked back at his students and knew that he had to protect them. So without hesitation, he runs over to the door and held the door closed using his own body, buying his students enough time to escape through the windows, which they did so by jumping from 2 floors up. Librescu sacrifices himself, taking bullets while trying to save his class. This man was a real hero. So now you're probably wondering, where were the police during all of this? Well, they responded quickly once they got word of the second shooting. But there was a catch. Remember those chains on the doors? The chains slowed down the police, giving him a whole extra 10 minutes to carry out the massacre. The cops eventually shot the locks, but by the time they got inside Norris Hall, it was already too late. The damage was done. At 9:51 a.m., about 10 minutes after the second attack started, in the center of room 211, after killing 32 people, Cho turns the gun on himself and ends his own life with a single bullet to the head. When the police enter room 211, they saw Cho laying on the ground, dead, with his guns beside him, and some of the students who were either injured or playing dead heard the officer's first words, "Gunman down." He never even gave the police a chance to arrest him. He took the easy way out while families had to sit there and suffer after what he did. 32 people dead, not including Cho himself, and 17 others were injured, which made the Virginia Tech school shooting one of the deadliest school shootings in US history. Next up is the Columbine school shooting. April 20th, 1999, at Columbine High School, a shooting that killed 12 students and 1 teacher in under 1 hour. But before we dive into that horrific day, let's talk about the months leading up to it, and how Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold meticulously planned what became one of the most well-known school shootings to date. The shooters Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were both students at Columbine. They were 18 and 17 years old. Eric Harris was the ringleader, and to say that he was angry at the world would be an understatement. His journal entries, essays, and even a website that he had set up were filled with violent, hateful rants. Dylan Klebold, well, he was quieter. But don't let that fool you, he was dealing with his own issues, mostly self-hatred and depression. His journals were filled with suicidal thoughts, but being paired with Harris brought out an even more violent side. Together, they formed a deadly team that fed off each other's fantasies. The two started stockpiling weapons in the months leading up to the attack. How did they do it? Well, they got their hands on guns through a friend who bought them at a gun show. Now, Harris even wrote in his journal about how excited he was to carry out the attack. "Dear diary, I'm about to do a shooting." They were so invested in this plan, they didn't just write it down. They documented everything on video. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. They filmed themselves discussing the plans, talking about who they wanted to target, and even rehearsing. The videos were called the basement tapes, and there actually are transcripts online. But the authorities have not released them in full, so people didn't attempt to copy it. There are clips where you can see them laughing and joking about the trauma they were going to cause. I mean, they were making a movie out of their own massacre. Now let's get this straight. Columbine wasn't supposed to be a school shooting. At least, not initially. These guys had a different plan. They wanted to plan 2 massive propane bombs in the school cafeteria, set on timers to detonate during lunchtime when the place would be packed with hundreds of students. The bombs were supposed to go off, causing mass casualties, which would then drive everyone outside where Harris and Klebold would be waiting with their guns, ready to shoot down every single survivor. Now that I told you that, let's start from the beginning. It's Tuesday morning on April 20th, 1999. Harris and Klebold arrive at Columbine High School at around 11:10 a.m. The two get out of their cars and start walking towards the school, dressed in trench coats, trying to hide their weapons. With bags in their hands containing the bombs and extra ammunition, they were ready to take the lives of every single student and teacher at Columbine High School. All except one, actually. As they were walking, they saw one of their classmates, Brooks Brown, who was outside smoking a cigarette before his next class. Now, Brooks was actually shocked to see Harris because earlier that day, they both had a test in one of their classes, which Harris obviously skipped. Brooks instantly started questioning him about why he missed the test that day. Harris, with a calm look in his eyes, looks him dead in the face and says, "It doesn't matter anymore." Just as Brooks was about to respond, Harris cuts him off and says, "Brooks, I like you now. Get out of here. Go home." Feeling a bit uneasy about the whole interaction and already wanting to skip his next class, Brooks walked away down South Pierce Street. This one decision saved his life. And I'm just gonna give my honest opinion here, I don't think that was an accident. This massacre was so heavily planned, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold even knew that the cops would respond fast to a bomb exploding in the middle of a high school. So they came up with a plan to divert firefighters and emergency personnel from the school. Just 3 miles south of Columbine High School, 2 backpacks with pipe bombs, aerosol canisters, and small propane tanks were strategically placed in a grassy open field, set to go off. One of the pipe bombs exploded, causing a small fire in the area. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and the Littleton Fire Department rushed over to the field and quickly took it out. No one was hurt. Now let's actually get back to the main plan. When Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold entered Columbine High School, they rushed over to the cafeteria, where they planted propane bombs timed to explode at exactly 11:16 a.m., 2 minutes after the start of lunch shift day, to ensure the room would be filled with students. After planting the bombs, the two ran outside towards their cars as they waited for the explosives to detonate and prepared to shoot any survivors fleeing from Columbine High School. 11:17 a.m. arrives, but the bombs in the cafeteria did not go off. Now, it is said that if these bombs actually did go off, it would have severely wounded 488 students in the cafeteria and damaged the whole school's structure. I mean, I'm talking about it would have collapsed the library into the cafeteria, possibly killing even more students and staff. So at this point, with the bomb failing to detonate, they moved to plan B. At 11:19 a.m., Harris and Klebold stepped out of their cars and started walking back towards the school, fully armed, ready to start shooting. Their first targets are Rachel Scott and Richard Castaldo, 2 students who were sitting outside of the west entrance of the school, just peacefully eating their lunch. The two shot both of them. Rachel is killed instantly when she was hit 4 times with rounds fired from Harris's carbine. Richard was shot 8 times in the chest, arm, and abdomen by both Harris and Klebold. He was left paralyzed below the chest. Harris then aimed his carbine down the west staircase in the direction of 3 students: Daniel Raba, Sean Graves, and Lance Kirkland. And guys, the students assumed that they were holding paintball guns and were about to walk up the staircase when Harris shot 10 bullets right at them, killing Daniel and injuring Sean and Lance. Dave Sanders, a teacher and coach at the school, was in the cafeteria when he heard the gunfire and began warning students around him. Klebold walked towards the students he and Harris had just injured. He first shot once at the body of Daniel with his shotgun, and then turned to Lance Kirkland, who was already wounded and lying on the ground from being shot by Harris. Lance begged for help, begged for his mercy. Klebold paused, stared into his soul, then said, "Sure, I'll help you." Klebold shot Kirkland right in the jaw with his shotgun. And guys, Lance Kirkland actually survived. This is what his face looked like. Now, Sean Graves crawled into the doorway of the cafeteria's west entrance and then collapsed. He rubbed his own blood on his face and played dead. After shooting Kirkland in the face with his shotgun, Klebold walked towards the cafeteria door. Here is something you may find disturbing. As he stepped over Sean, he remembers Klebold looking down at him and saying, "Sorry, dude." Teacher Patty Nielsen was walking towards the west entrance when everyone was screaming. Her first reaction was, "These damn kids," thinking Harris and Klebold were either filming a video or pulling a student prank. Yes, that's how far school shootings were from people's minds back then. Harris shot the windows of the glass door. Nielsen gets hit with the fragments of glass. Scared for her life, she ran to the library and called 911.
I was on hold and I saw a gun. I said, "What's going on out there?" And this kid said, "Oh, it's probably some video production. It's probably a joke." I said, "Well, I don't think that's a good idea." And I went walking outside. I couldn't see what was going on. He turned the gun straight at us and shot. And my God, the window went out. And the kid standing there with me, I think he got hit. Okay. Something in my shoulder. Okay. We've got help on the way, ma'am.
11:24 a.m. Harris briefly diverts his attention from the students and begins shooting at police officers in the parking lot. He's got a semi-automatic rifle in his hands and fires about 10 rounds in Deputy Neil Gardner's direction, who was the community resource officer at the school. Gardner, not exactly thrilled to be on the receiving end of that, pulls out his own gun and fires 4 shots back. Deputy Smoker, another officer at the scene, then fires 3 rounds at Harris too. Fortunately, Smoker doesn't get hit. So after exchanging shots with Gardner and Smoker for a few minutes, Harris and Klebold move away from the doors and return to their original plan. And now, at this moment, the cops actually decided to sit and wait outside of the school. Meanwhile, Harris and Klebold's next targets are students sitting in the library entrance hallway and teacher Dave Sanders. They fire off their shots, injuring the students and killing Dave Sanders. Then they toss a couple of pipe bombs. This is where things get especially awful. At 11:29 a.m., Harris and Klebold enter the school's library. If you've read anything about Columbine, you know the library is where the worst of the violence takes place. There were over 50 students hiding in there, ducking under tables, trying to stay out of sight. Harris and Klebold walk in, guns blazing. They yell, laugh, taunt the students, and shoot anyone they came across. The first student killed in the library is Kyle Velasquez, a mentally disabled 16-year-old sitting at a computer. The shooters make their way around the room, firing at anyone they saw. They find more victims hiding under tables. Casey Bernal, a 17-year-old junior, becomes one of the most well-known victims of the massacre. According to some reports, Klebold asked her, "Do you believe in God?" She replied yes. He shot her right there after she answered, and then he laughed about it. Guys, this is honestly one of the most messed up goddamn stories I've ever covered on this channel. Anyways, the shooting goes on for what must have felt like forever for these students trapped inside. In reality, it lasted just under 7 minutes. At 11:36 a.m., they leave the library, but the shooting isn't over yet. The two were still going. After leaving the library, Harris and Klebold wander through the school, firing their weapons, tossing pipe bombs. Then they return to the cafeteria and Harris shoots at one of the propane bombs. "What are you doing?" "I'm trying to detonate it manually." But again, it doesn't explode. This dialogue is improvised, by the way. I don't actually know what they said in this moment. By 12:08 p.m., the shooting had mostly stopped. Harris and Klebold returned to the library. They take one last look at each other, probably super proud of the evil they had just committed. And then they put their guns to their heads. They both shot themselves in the head, ending this horrible, horrible day. They had just killed 12 students and 1 teacher, injuring 21 more, and traumatized the lives of countless others, all in the span of just under an hour. This just makes me sick. Next, we have the Uvalde school shooting, May 24th, 2022. This day will be remembered for all of the wrong reasons. And the details of how things unfolded at Robb Elementary School are as devastating as they come. So let's start with the shooter. Who was Salvador Ramos? He was an 18-year-old with a troubled background. Ramos had dropped out of Uvalde High School, and according to his classmates, he was socially awkward, isolated, and often subject of bullying. He was far from a typical teen. His behavior was erratic, and in the months leading up to the shooting, things got noticeably worse. Ramos began spending large amounts of time online, posting disturbing images of guns and self-harm. Here's where things get really messed up. Ramos had made multiple cryptic posts on social media, hinting at something very bad coming. He even sent direct messages to people making vague threats about shooting up a school, which we'll get into one of those text conversations in a second. So the warning signs were there, but once again, they were missed or ignored. Now let's get into the morning of May 24th, 2022. Ramos had got into an argument with his grandmother over failing to graduate from high school. Filled with rage, he then takes a gun, points it at her, then starts shooting his grandmother in the face at their home in Uvalde, Texas. She survives barely and manages to call 911 despite her injuries. As Ramos rushes out the house, he sends incriminating text messages to a 15-year-old girl from Germany that he had met online. And actually, before he shot his grandmother, he warned this German girl that he was about to do it, saying, "Waiting for this, I'ma do something to her RN, or right now." Then, as he rushed out of the house about 15 minutes later, he sent the second text message boasting about what he had done, that he had just shot his grandmother. And in his third and final message, he admitted that he was going to shoot up an elementary school. Her response to all of this was cool. Yes, all she said was cool. This 15-year-old girl later faced trial in Frankfurt, Germany, and was found guilty of failing to report planned crimes. As she should. Filled with so much rage, Ramos steals his grandmother's truck and heads straight for Robb Elementary School, where hundreds of kids and teachers are going about their normal day with no idea of what was to come. 11:28 a.m. Ramos crashes the truck into a ditch near the school. And by the way, here's what it actually looked like. Then Ramos quickly gets out of his car from the passenger side door, takes his Daniel Defense AR-15 style assault rifle, points it at two witnesses outside a nearby funeral home, and starts firing. He fired 4 shots. Neither of them were hit. By this point, several people had seen Ramos crash the truck and noticed he was walking towards the school carrying a rifle. 11:32 a.m. Ramos fires multiple rounds at the outside of the school. It is even said that some of the bullets went through a window. Inside, a 4th grade student saw Ramos with what he later described as a big gun. Before we get into Ramos entering the school, here's actually a diagram that shows the distance between his grandmother's house to the crash site and the school. Calls were already coming into the police, warning them that a man with a gun was heading towards Robb Elementary. We'll get to the police's response later. Trust me, it's bad. At 11:33 a.m., Ramos enters Robb Elementary through an unlocked door through the west entrance. Yup, unlocked. He walks in as he's supposed to be there, carrying a rifle and a backpack filled with ammunition. It's almost unimaginable that a door could be left unsecured after all of the school shootings up until 2022. But that's exactly what happened. Ramos arrives at 2 connected classrooms, rooms 111 and 112. Which are filled with students between the ages of 9 and 11. The teacher, Irma Garcia, tried to lock the door to the classroom. Ramos shot the door's window. Garcia was backed into the classroom by the shooter. In her final moments, she looked back at her students and told them good night. Then she was shot and killed in front of all of her students. Ramos looks at the kids, screaming in fear, and says, "You're all going to die." This is according to one of the survivors in the room. He then opened fires. No warning, no hesitation. Ramos fired more than 100 rounds at the elementary students and teachers in 4 minutes. Arnulfo Reyes, another teacher who was in classroom 111, was shot multiple times. As the teacher was on the ground trying to survive, he looked at his students and told them to get under the table and act like you're asleep. Silence. Until Ramos unleashed a second round of gunfire at the students. Reyes, terrified for his life, laid on the ground and pretended to be unconscious. But that didn't work because Ramos walked over to him, looked right at him, shot him again. While Reyes laid there in his own blood, he claimed that he could hear one of the young students from room 112 yell out, "Officer, we're in here, we're in here." but no one came to save them. All 11 students in classroom 111 died during the shooting. The scene inside the classrooms is horrifying, with kids hiding under their desks, some desperately trying to play dead. Several students were able to call 911 from inside the classrooms, whispering to dispatchers that they needed help. But tragically, these calls wouldn't bring immediate rescue. Here's where the frustration and honestly, all my rage about this situation comes in. Yes, I'm putting my own personal opinion here. What I'm about to say is absolutely ridiculous. The first officers arrived on the scene just minutes after Ramos entered the school. By 11:35 a.m., Uvalde Police Department officers surrounded the building before storming in the school just a minute later. But instead of entering the classrooms, they waited. Yeah, you heard me right. They waited for 77 painful, agonizing minutes. The police stood in the hallway outside the classrooms while during this time, more 911 calls in from the students trapped inside, begging, pleading for help. One girl even reportedly told the dispatcher, "Please send the police now." And yet, no one went in. The officers outside were reportedly waiting for keys to the classroom doors, despite the fact that some experts later said that those doors could have been breached in without them. Parents outside begged the officers to enter the building and save their kids. When they didn't move, the parents decided to enter the building themselves. The officers actually held them back and tackled parents who even dared to enter the school, screaming at them, warning them that they would use tasers if the parents did not comply with directions. And they actually did, because the police pepper sprayed a parent who was trying to get their child. And another officer tackled the father of one of the students. And the police also reportedly used a taser on a parent who approached a bus to get their child. Absolutely ridiculous. It wasn't until 12:50 p.m., more than an hour after Ramos first entered the school, that a tactical unit finally breached the classroom. 77 minutes after Salvador Ramos first entered the school and started his rampage, law enforcement finally decides it's time to go in. Like I said, up until this point, cops had been stuck in the hallway, either hesitating or downright ignoring the sounds of gunfire. It's not a good look. But officers are pacing in the halls, and meanwhile, these kids are trapped inside rooms 111 and 112 with Ramos inside. So, who finally steps up? Border Patrol Tactical Unit officers. Yeah, not the local cops. It's these federal agents that came in like they were about to wrap this whole thing up. Now let me take you back inside. Ramos has barricaded the inside of the two connected classrooms. He's been inside there since 11:33 a.m., shooting at anything that moved. Cops had made a few attempts to get close, but retreated every time he fired at them. The shooter had total control, and those kids were out of luck until the BOR-TAC showed up. At 12:50 p.m., the BOR-TAC team decides it's time to stop waiting. They stacked up in front of the door, armed to a T, ready to face whatever's on the other side. Go, go, go! Breach! They open the door, but Ramos fires at them through the classroom's inner walls. So this time on the second breach, they go in, no hesitation. Time to get this guy, they go straight for Ramos. One of the officers fires a shot and strikes the shooter. Ramos falls, and that's it. Shooter down. In a matter of seconds, the nightmare inside the classrooms come to a brutal end. After all of that waiting, all of that hesitation, it's finally over. They killed Ramos on sight. They finally took action, ending the standoff, but the damage had already been done. 21 innocent lives were lost, and countless others were left traumatized. The response from law enforcement became a major point of national anger. Among the dead were 19 young children and 2 teachers. Irma Garcia and Eva Mirles were the 2 teachers killed in the shooting. They died trying to shield their students from Ramos's gunfire, sacrificing themselves to save others. And the children, the ages of the victims were from 9 to 11 years old. These kids had their whole lives ahead of them. Just take a second to think about that. All of that ripped away in an instant. It's the kind of heartbreak that you seriously cannot put into words. Once the shooting ended, the fallout was instant. Parents and families were outraged, not just at the loss of life, but at the awful police response. response. Investigations were launched into why the officers waited so long to enter the classrooms, with various agencies pointing fingers at each other. Local police, the Uvalde School District's police force, and federal agents all had a role in the response, and the lack of coordination only made things worse. The Uvalde school shooting had people talking to each other in the sort of national debate over gun control, mental health, and school safety. But what really set this event apart was the public's anger towards law enforcement. The community wanted answers. And when the initial reports started coming out about how long the police waited, the anger only grew. In July 2022, the Texas House of Representatives released a report detailing the failures of the police response, calling it egregiously poor decision-making. The report highlighted that over 370 law enforcement officers were on the scene, and yet no one took command of the situation. The school's safety measures were also called into question, particularly the unlocked door that allowed Ramos easy access to the building. I just want to say that originally I wasn't going to make a part 2 to the last video right here, but I know in the last video a lot of people wanted me to talk about certain tragedies like Columbine. Now, as I'm doing research for this video, I realized that there are so many school shootings that there is no way you can even know all of them. Seriously guys, please stay safe and be aware of the signs, because I know a lot of you guys, or even people you love, might still be in school. I love all of you guys so much, and I hope this video can help spread awareness. Thank you guys for watching.